Hello, horror addicts. I'm Kristin Battestella, aka Kbatz, and tonight we're going to talk about a Kraft taboo topic: repairs. Now, we could go out, spend all our money, buy something expensive, and you feel like when something's expensive and something breaks on it, oh, it's ruined, oh, I could crazy glue it, but it'll never be as nice, it'll never be as good, and then we feel bad because we spent a lot of money on it. So we feel excited when we don't spend too much on crafts, but if a craft breaks, damages, needs a little fix, do we feel like it's crappy, jury rigged, shoddy, cheap, bad? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But I feel like we forget that maintenance is okay. And not everybody can just, go out and buy something new all the time. You get a little rip on your couch, maybe you can cover it up, throw a toss pillow on it, but, does everybody go out and buy a new piece of furniture? No. That's kind of absurd, isn't it? So why do we take that kind of imposter mentality into all of our crafting and upcycling and DIY that, what I do will never be good enough? It doesn't have to be. And because it's yours and you created it, I feel like maybe we always feel like it's in a state of flux, that it'll never be good enough, or maybe I should have done this. But that can also be a positive, that something can continue to change, or could be added to, or could be made better. So there's nothing wrong with having to do some repairs. So last year I made some crafts, as you may recall. And, even at the time I said, sometimes things are delicate, or sometimes things take care, or this may need to be fixed, it may not last, maybe, maybe not, we'll see. But it doesn't mean that it wasn't worthwhile time if something goes a little wrong. Now, I've got maybe 30 assorted pumpkin sizes. And the first time I did these, I had a different type of leaf. I had the little pipe cleaners, and they were all cute and adorable, and that was fine. The next time I did them, maybe it was a different fabric, maybe it was a different set of leaves. I found these cute little driftwood pieces, if you may recall, that I painted, and stuck them on pumpkins as stems. Sometimes they come unhot glued. This is the only one that came unhot glued. Is that a term? Unhot glued? After a whole year. So that's not so bad. Glue gun fixes, that's nothing. This little guy, as you can already see, you may recall, these were free. I mean, if you can make something free, and this was from the dollar store, it's one of the battery-operated little twist candles. I have 4 of these, and one of them had this little twine malfunction, which this twine was kind of a little pain in the butt about continually wrapping. And does it look all right? Is an area covered? Can I add a little more piece here? Is it even there? And I'm not necessarily a fan of the cutesy or the rustic, but sometimes that's also a great way to cheat. Well, it's only supposed to be something cute, so it's okay if maybe it's a little crooked or not quite right. Or, if it's rustic, it's meant to have, the twine be uneven and it will be okay. But again, this is a glue stick fix, and that's all right. I mean, especially if these are things that you're getting the whole family in on together to do some of your crafts. I mean, that's time well spent. I mean, regardless of what the results end up being, right? When we're sharing all our love of horror and the macabre. Next on the surgeon's table. You may recall this little evil guy. There is a DIY how-to on making your own cardboard coffin at horroraddicts.net, and I wanted to show you that this had some damage, which was my fault, purely. At the time when I wrote the article, I had an oblong box and another angular box, and I decided to put them together. And that took a little jury rigging, a lot of tape and touch-up, and I said at the time that I thought maybe it felt top heavy or delicate. But heck, if you get one season of Wow Pop where somebody enters your door and they're like, ew, that's okay. And in all this process of moving down here in the basement where this was stored, I knocked it over, and it kind of ripped. And then I kind of went a little crazy in the restoration. I glued more where I thought was delicate and went outrageous with some of this tape design here. So now it's time to repaint it. And I wanted to show a little bit of the paint process. As this was in the studio here, taped together, every time I had a glob of paint when I finished that wasn't being used, it got scratched on here, rubbed on here. So this color paint over here, you can see, is a little bit of actually what went into the sort of brownish yellow muddy kind of color that went into the dry brush on the Pot of Bones tower, which if you haven't seen at horroraddicts.net, you will soon. Again, depending on time and placement in the queue. There's so many things happening this Halloween season, except for Halloween, apparently. But I wanted to explain this is the same technique as what's on the DIY cardboard tombstones. I did a video on those last year, where just the main thing of, instead of just painting it a color, one color, which would be solid flat, with the tombstones, it's a graduated effect to get a more aged stone look. But this was obviously meant to be kind of aged wood streaky. So here you can just see where it's random bad kind of color. And then you can kind of see the original paint color here, which was a mix of browns. And this is where I also had a, I think this was orange and black or yellow and black mixed together for something. I'm not even sure what. And you can see now this is too dark. This is too uneven. It doesn't match. So obviously there's some sort of happy medium here between the two. But it's okay not to have everything be matched and perfect. Now this was supposed to be an old wooden coffin that had some sort of monster chained up and trying to get out, and it was kind of the fun shocker of it. So it's okay for this to be kind of old or streaky or patchy, as if it's meant to look like old wood that has been, you know, weakened, broken down. Some spots are more worn than others. So you can see how there's sort of more of a light streak in some spots, and then there's the solid brown. And this was all created just by mixing different types of brown colors sort of on the scale together. If I turn it this way here again, you can also see more of what was originally just kind of the brown, with here was more of a darker spot. And on this side, it still takes a little bit of repair. You can see the same, where this is too light right now. Now that's also okay, that it's light right now. That you can work with that. That is okay. Ooh, I'm losing my chains. Which actually, oh yeah, I guess that kind of makes sense, doesn't it, to lose the chain, so I can actually work on it. And you know, this, as I said in the write-up here about how this was made, this was just, I think, either Goodwill chain for $3 and then dollar store chain. And these little spooky little kind of monster fingers came from Goodwill, actually. I have a giant bag of those, and I'm not quite sure what to do with the rest of them. But hey, you never know when you might need some scary monster fingers, am I right? Now, this is one of my pathetic little paint palettes. You can see some of my projects, perhaps evidence of what's what on here. And this is actually just one of those, if I turn it this way, it's probably better to see, a little kid's lunch tray from the dollar store. You don't need to have fancy painting supplies, and particularly when you go in some of the craft shops where there's some name brand paints and brushes and palettes, it can be pretty expensive. So just dollar store supplies, thrift supplies, keep your eyes open. You can find some of these different types of paints, regular craft paints in the stores. And, I know I use a lot of black and brown, but the smaller bottles of these, I think the little 2.5 or 4 ounce ones, are only a couple dollars. Sometimes maybe they'll go on sale if 50, 75 cents or something. So, or they come in assorted packs where you can get 10 or 12 of them together. So you're not breaking the bank by getting some paints to do some trial and error. When I know I'm using a lot, then I can spend the, I don't know, $8 or $10 to get a bulk. This is the 16 ounce where I know I'm going to make my use. And, I'm not big, I don't care necessarily about brand. Whatever color works. And the tombstones, because I had a lot of them, it took me several months. I would do like one a weekend, where it was okay to mix a little batch of paint together and then put it on. And if I thought that was too light, or I thought it was too dark, or if I just wanted to get the bare coverage on the first coat, it was okay to let it dry and to leave it alone for a little while, and then go back and look at it and say, well, I'm not pleased with that kind of color. Maybe this needs to be blended better a little here. And with this as a wood grain kind of style, it just takes straight brushing, where you vary your strokes and your color, and until you find something you like. So you could paint it one day and say, I don't like that. That is too bright in the wrong spot. Particularly, maybe then you also have to look at your study, where maybe you wouldn't want this to be super light colored, kind of worn wood, because is that a bright spot that detracts from this sort of statement area here? In fact, I think, now it's of course covered up by tape. I actually think this, I had made a lighter brown, maybe almost like using a brown, a dark brown, a black, and a white, where you could blend color across. I think I actually had this corner here, you can go back and see the original pictures, was actually a very light brown, almost on white, where the idea was that this is sort of the focal point right before this kind of monster hand. And if this monster's trying to get out, then that area there maybe should be the sort of, in theory, the weakest spot of the coffin. So, and it is a top corner where if he's shaking and shimmying, that's probably an area that would get a lot of damage. So it sounds kind of silly because it's a fake monster trying to get out of a chained coffin. But sometimes maybe I guess you also have to think of some of the realistic aspects. Now, and what was also fun about this was I had the right boxes to make this semi-large scale, but this can be just something family fun as well. If you've got, some demented little folks in your family like me, you could have a lot of fun with this. Maybe you could have a smaller little box that's maybe more like a cage, where maybe you've got some kind of monster tail sticking out, or something fun like that, little dinosaurs breaking out or something like that. Or if you wanted to have, a window with a little mask inside that's maybe like some kind of little Dracula vampire kind of coffin, So compared to, I've seen in the stores, of course, Halloween time now, where they've got those fabric coffins that are like collapsible fabric, or sometimes they have their cardboard coffins, but they're sometimes $20, $25, $30. And they just are plain black or brown, or just have a little scratch kind of RIP kind of on them. And that's it. Again, do you doctor them because, were they cheap or were they expensive? You have to, justify your costs for yourself. Is it something that you can work with in your projects? Is it something you want to be as is, but is it worth the price? And do they last as well? Sometimes you pay a lot for something and it doesn't last, and what was the point? So you could customize something and have fun with it. And now we're going to fix this little guy together. I have turned my coffin actually upright because, again, we have to, quote, follow the grain of our faux wood here. So if I had it laying down, you'd want to maybe get into the habit of going horizontally, which maybe is fine when you're just doing coverage, when you just want to lop something on. But when you're doing your final kind of design work, you want it to be in the whatever proper upright positions that it needs to be, and not fuss over the tape. And again, it's terrible to say, but this is just a little monster scary coffin that he's trying to break out of. It's okay if the angles are askew or if something's imperfect. There we go. Now we have some sound. I'm not Bob Ross. I'm not going to do super fancy instruction, I assure you. Yeah, as if I could. Now, this is actually two slightly different color browns. This is a straight brown, and this was the darker burnt umber that at the bottom of its tube, where I had already started, I think, adding another kind of black, or had already been mixing it in the sort of empty bottle. So these are slightly different shades, which is kind of nice. So I just want to demonstrate a little bit of that kind of gradient kind of technique. And this is just a regular little brush. You can use any kind of brush that you desire, I suppose. When I want to get really massive large coverage, obviously you can use a larger brush. When you want to do finite things, you can use something smaller, of course. And sometimes I like if it's a brush that I have that was already used. I'm not sure if you can see here on this one, where it was already kind of dried and maybe it's getting a little gnarly, it's not so perfect, and that kind of helps when I want these kind of streaky kind of lines. So can't quite tell the difference on these brown paints yet. That's okay. Here I can do the light next to the dark, and there you can really see the difference between these two shades. But that's okay, because we can cover up this masking tape, and then you can worry about making the color and the design kind of match. So here you can see where there I had a little more of a black spot. And just by letting the brush sort of streak and dry is where you can see, you can let that kind of effect happen. Okay, that does sound kind of Bob Rossy, wow. Where you sort of let the end of the brush kind of dry and speckle, that's where you get maybe that little bit of line, and that's okay. That's what you want. And, you know, again, if it's something you don't like, it can just be covered up with another coat of paint, which is pretty great. Some objects I've done, obviously with the bones that were on the bone tower display and in the bone wreath, that was like a dry brush, brush on, brush off. Now I sound like the Karate Kid. There's that little kind of ripple kind of streak where, see, now I have put a little bit of paint here and it's blended very well to what was the original coat here, where it looks like different just streaks and ripple of wood. And again, maybe a particularly perfectionist person would look up close and want to examine and study, and this piece of tape isn't cooperating, and sometimes you find you may need to make more tape and adjustments, and that's okay. But for an object like this, you know, someone is meant to turn a corner and see it and be shocked and scream like my mother. She walked in my house and said, "What is that thing?" and cursed in a bunch of Italian words. But when you are doing something that maybe will be up close for finite inspection, well, maybe that's where you put more attention to detail. And there's some angular areas here from where this was originally the flaps of the boxes. So sometimes the tape lines are going a different way than your straight line. And again, that's where you can adjust Can you have a sort of paint effect compensate for that? And if this is my lighter coat here that's really just covering the masking tape, this is probably not the layer for some of that finite blending. And that's okay. Like I said, this can be a multi-step kind of thing, which if you don't have a lot of time, maybe this isn't something you could do the day before Halloween and maybe be entirely pleased with it, because it was just, okay, we're painting it and we're sticking it up and that's it. So this is something that maybe takes a few days more, but especially recently I have found painting again therapeutic, and this obviously isn't even artistic painting, but it's just maybe the idea of a sense of control and an accomplishment, that the idea that here was something that needed to be painted, and a little bit of sort of calm satisfaction of having everything covered and having a task kind of completed by you, no matter how small. So maybe I won't show you all this kind of coverage, but I wanted to give you an idea of just the basic paint coverage here. And that streaking. In fact, even add a touch of black, which black is very strong, so generally sometimes just a drop of black is enough to really change the color. And you can see how neat when you're mixing together, when you get that kind of a rippled, kind of marbled, sometimes that little streak effect right there in the paint, you can use that to your benefit. So gosh, I really do feel like Bob Ross when you do one side of the brush in one color and one side of the brush in the other, then you do get multiple streaks and lines, which also, when this paint is still all kind of wet, that's also when you could do that. So, oh geez, now does that seem too dark? Well, I could immediately go back to the lighter color and change that. And when that dries is when you're still going to have that kind of mixed marble effect. So I really think that worked out really well, especially on the tombstones, which I will be talking about them as well. I did have one tombstone last year that didn't even survive very early on, so we're going to try and repair that one as well. But with the tombstone, it was the gray, black, and white, and also in certain areas a touch of green at the corners for more of a kind of moss kind of mixed in kind of look, to make it feel sort of aged, like maybe there were actually, you know, copper parts. So I can feel like there's still going to be a little bit more tape repair over here on this odd kind of angle, but again, that's okay. Basically, I mean, I wouldn't say necessarily that this is art. I mean, it's trash trying to be repurposed and recycled and made useful, but the notion that, okay, maybe it is, maybe not art, but a vision perhaps that will take time to get right, and that's okay. I mean, what do we have right now but time? Right? Maybe, maybe not. Now see, over here, where I've mixed the dark, you can't quite see as well. I've mixed the dark over here, where it looks a little better in blend. You can kind of see here. Actually, particularly, there is a ridge line here in the middle, so you can actually really kind of see where here seemed bright still, but over here is actually darkening and blending. And as paints begin to dry, you could see where you've worked or haven't worked. And then, okay, let's say, all right, this is a center rim here, where again, maybe something would be more fragile or worn piece of wood. Well, then I can actually just go back and add a light streak if I so choose. And yes, sometimes you can see when even when there's a little bit on the brush and you just want to make dry. And maybe that works best with cardboard because cardboard has that kind of natural kind of ripple sort of to it. And certain types of cardboard obviously work better than others. That was the problem with the Shakespeare tombstone that I'll show you shortly as well. But really, this touch up on this, the little glue on the pumpkins, I needed to do some sewing on one of the pumpkin ottomans. I really actually have not had that much work and repair to do. I have, I think, 25 giant tombstones that have all held up very well. So I would say I got my money's worth. I spent $50 for the big cardboard tombstones. And that was more just the paints and tapes and moss and some of the lettering and accessories. But I feel, compared to when you see some of those little dinky, tiny little tombstones that don't have much of an impact, you know, my giant little cemetery gateway, it has impact. You know, I guess that's the fulfillment of the Halloween materials when your mother walks into your house and screams. That's mission accomplished, right, horror addicts? Obviously, you want to be in an area where you can move and maneuver, or sort of, you know, lay down your paper or plastic or coverage if you're going to get any paint splatter, or, you know, wear your paint smock. I don't have on any Kbatz jewelry here because I tend to get a little messy with my paints, and that's okay. So I can't also stand nice and fancy, again, like our Mr. Ross, Rob Boss. So get into your paints, enjoy it. It's part of the fun. And with something like this that doesn't have to be perfect, you know, you can let, you know, some of the kids slap on some of the paint any way that they like, and then, you know, if mom wants to fix something a little later, that's okay too. And you can see here again where the dark and the light are mixing together, and in order to make it match, see, you can still see this tape line. You obviously want it to blend and you want the color to hide that, so you can actually, you just do this sort of serrated, I'm talking about knives, right? Kind of draw that upward, and then again, that's where you get that sort of streak line to sort of continue. So, and obviously this will take more coats, but the notion that it doesn't just stop right here, that there's not lines right here, that there is a sort of, you're following it, the gradient rather than the line. And that is what's kind of making it a more multi-dimensional design than just a plain piece of cardboard that you paid a lot of money for at the Halloween store. This is going to need more coats probably, but that's all right. With so much new tape on here, do a coat, let it dry, and you can see maybe if there is, I think up here there might be a tape issue, but that's okay. If you have the paint, have the supplies, that's all right. Also, don't mind if I have any little cuts and scrapes on my hand because the cat was uncooperative today, which can happen too. Sometimes you want to get away from the cat or the kids and you can just paint. go. And around the corners here also, don't just stop one line where it is on the front. You know, make sure your corners and your edges kind of blend together. Just one little piece right there. We can doctor later. There we go. That's actually looking pretty good. Huh. This was actually that dark spot that I showed you in the beginning, where I had just thrown some black paint that obviously was too dark of a spot. But now, that looks all right. Now see, these actually look like they were here originally, and now they seem kind of light. But you do for coverage, and then you're actually able to make your different streak kind of designs, where then all of a sudden you are being kind of artsy-fartsy touch-ups. But I think when you get to a point where maybe where I can't tell here now what was original and what is not, that's when you kind of come up with a really good blending kind of design. And again, if you're doing this stopping and starting, looking at multiple parts at a time, you will be stopping and starting, things will dry and need adjustment. So it will always be kind of a in progress kind of process until you're content with something. Now I'm not so sure if I like that kind of light spot up here. A little bit of the darker streaks. A little speck of light colors right there. But that doesn't look too bad. So, all right. It's one piece down. 50 jillion more to go. Now, as you're making sure you're kind of gradually blending up, you also don't want to leave just solid lines right there on the sides. Remember, you also kind of have to blend width as well, so there's not any kind of sharp, this is where I've obviously stopped this paint right here line. Duh. And again, that can be done with different scales of color. Going back across with that little lighter. Now, it's also kind of a good idea to not do all one spot at once. Now, I'm working with one particular kind of mix of paint. Well, spread that around on the tombstone. This isn't a tombstone yet. Woo! But you know, that way, again, the areas kind of match, that there is a certain cohesion. And you can also embrace flaws. This was a kind of seam of tape that has a little bit of gnarly to it, and sometimes it's picking up the paint, sometimes it's not. That again creates dimension, that there are high and low spots that are going to have different color and weather if we're talking about kind of faux rough and tumble wood. So you can use what may seem to be the bad of the material to your gain. Up here in the corner was again a little lighter spot that we need to blend. Not over blend to the point where there's one color again, but you want the mix. In some areas I'm already again seeing, wait, does this need work or did I do this part already? Which, it's what you want. It actually doesn't look too bad either. But here, again, you can see the difference where it's not a case of here's where there's different color or different pieces of wood meeting together. Here it is clearly, here's a tape line. Here's a disconnecting piece. And that is what you want to hide. You want to hide your conventions and modern attachments and assembly in order to make it look like, you know, a ye old creepy coffin. If I had more boxes, I think I would make a traditional coffin. But sometimes this year it has felt maybe a little too morbid, understandably. You know, if you're not into horror right now, that's okay too. But at the same time, I've gone with the Halloween projects because to me, again, that also becomes more of thinking of what Halloween originally was, and things like the original Samhain and Day of the Dead, where, you know, it was a time to honor, you know, the spirits of loved ones, that, you know, the veil between worlds was thin. And maybe that's also later religious connotations that came onto it, All Saints Day and such. But particularly this year with so many passing, and people are talking about canceling Halloween, and I'm thinking like, hold on, wait a minute. Not even thinking of, you know, our fun-loving Halloween connotations, but that this is actually expressly the day of the year that's meant to be about, you know, appreciating the dead. And you can't take that away from us now. You know, we really need that. So this is the things that I think about while I'm painting loony cardboard crap. You know, I get really philosophical. But there's nothing wrong with that. And also, I mean, this is a repair that, you know, I didn't necessarily have to do. If this wasn't good to put upstairs by the door, well, so what? Oh, you know, if I'm busy, I won't get to it this year, I can fix it, put it out another time. Maybe not. So the idea that this is something that I'm fixing to make better, to honor a day of death, in a weird way, is kind of, again, very therapeutic. There's a certain solace or solitude, which is ironic because there's a difference between solitude and lonely, and I think if you're isolated by yourself, it can be a pretty difficult time, especially. But maybe it can also be pretty difficult if you're, you know, in a house with a lot of rowdy as well. So it's important to find what's important and the things that matter. And Halloween matters.